Hi, my people. Welcome back to the Creative Weirdo podcast. I'm so grateful and excited to have you here. If you're watching the video version exclusively on YouTube, then you'll probably see that I've changed my location a little bit. Just slightly moved backwards because I got a chair in my room now and I'm really excited about it and I just cannot get myself to not sit in it. So we're getting comfy today for this conversation. I really want to talk about everything to do with the pressure of kind of prioritizing creativity and having to make time for it, trying to fit it into your daily life in a way that, actually makes you feel like you're making it a part of your daily routine rather than something that you're just kind of dipping your toes into when you have the time to, and then losing that kind of motivation in a way. So every time you come back to it, it's harder and harder, and it's easier to let those limiting beliefs come through. Yeah, I don't know. I just kind of want to talk about it because not for nothing, but we live in a world where creativity is not something that you necessarily are taught to capitalize off of. The world that we live in makes it seem like getting compensated for your creativity is a rare thing. And it's something that you're either born into or you have like this very obvious talent and everything else flows into your life naturally if that's the case. But if not, then your creativity is just something that, probably brings you a lot of joy, but you probably don't have time for. And because of that, you find yourself being very depleted in your personal life because you're not being creative. But then the times where you do tap into your creativity, you're also probably not feeling that great about yourself either because you're not constantly working that muscle. You're not constantly being comfortable with being creative because you're not prioritizing it in your life, point blank, period. So I know that sounds like a little wishy-washy and might be confusing to follow. It almost feels like I'm opening up this huge can of worms when I talk about all these things, but I want to eventually get to a point in this episode where we have these tangible steps that we can take that break it up and make it seem a little bit more realistic with our personal lives and what our current daily routine is already asking of us, and actually just coming to understand that we can prioritize creativity if we allow ourselves to make space for it. Okay. That starts with like understanding where in your life there is space for it, understanding what's weighing on you too much already, like all those things. But I don't want to overwhelm you. So the first thing I want to talk about is kind of just scheduling times for creativity because me personally, this is something that I have always struggled with. Okay. I used to, when I first started my podcast 2 years ago, and I was originally under the name of Patience to Prosperity, I've dabbled with as many approaches to the creative process as I could possibly think of. Okay. And at one point, I was scheduling certain days to sit on the mic and record. And it just happened to be the day that, I didn't have a ton of things going on. So I would just schedule it for that day specifically. And I found myself getting burnt out a lot and getting really discouraged by the fact that I was getting burnt out because now I have done the work to intentionally cut out these time frames for me to focus just on my craft. And when I find myself in those places where I don't have the motivation, the ideas are not flowing, I'm not reaching that flow state, whatever, but I carved out that time specifically to be creative, then it makes me feel like I don't have what it takes. Maybe I just, am eventually just going to run out of ideas with this project and I didn't think it through enough or whatever. Like, I could give you an entire episode worth of how many limiting beliefs come in your head when you are pursuing a creative act. But I just think it's important to mention that not everyone operates that way. There might be some people that operate great off of that foundation, but for me personally, when it comes to the act of actually putting pen to paper and like genuinely making that the time that you are, writing your song, recording your podcast episode, painting your picture, whatever it might be, putting that in any metaphoric or actual physical way that makes sense to you, that's not going to work for everyone when it's on a time scale. okay? Because the one thing that creativity is begging of you is to be truthful and honest. And if you're finding yourself caught up in your thoughts, caught up in your head so much to the point where those thoughts that are keeping you caught up are actually inhibiting your ability to be vulnerable and to be true and to capture all of that emotion and the essence of what you're feeling in your art, then you're just going to come out with these sloppy imitations of what you're feeling. And that's going to make you feel like you are not capturing your artistic vision as the artist, okay? Even saying the word artist sometimes is like, ugh, I'm not an artist. Like, I don't make art, because you have it in your head that, like, an artist has to be, I don't fucking, like, Stevie Nicks, like, that's another thing. And I'm kind of going in a million directions, but that's kind of the only way to talk about this today. Another thing that comes through is us just putting so many unconscious labels on what it means to be creative, period. Okay. And what it means to be an artist. And that's a whole nother conversation, to be honest. And I've kind of had a million conversations like that already. So just look back at old episodes, to be honest. Just go do a deep dive on my old episodes, especially Patience Prosperity. That's where we talk about all the limiting beliefs and stuff like that. But sometimes it's more about doing the creative work, putting the pen to paper first, and then making meaning of it, making sense of it after the fact that you put the pen to paper. And that's a part that I get caught up a lot in my creative process, is like, what fulfills me the most as an artist is when I see my art speaking for itself, okay? When I see old ideas manifesting into new ideas and connecting to future ideas and future projects, like, that's what gets that fire burning under me, that gets me wanting to show up for the next thing and excited about what the next idea that I have is going to be, But when you get so caught up in that part of the process, instead of just allowing it to kind of happen naturally and then assessing how it connects after the fact, I think that invites in a lot of room for criticism on what you're creating. It kind of puts your art into a box that you might not even realize you're putting it into. And, your art is not asking you to make meaning of it. That's kind of how the audience plays into it. Like, your audience, who you're sharing your art to, they're going to attach their own perception of what your art means to them to what you're giving them, okay? Even if that's not what you were ultimately trying to portray. It's like everyone's life experiences and things that they're going through and lessons that they're being taught and things like that. Like, that's all going to tie into their experience of consuming your art, And sometimes it has nothing to do with you as the artist. It has more to do with them. So that's a whole nother thing, is like, okay, well, now you're thinking too much about the audience when you're so concerned on how this is going to translate to the outside world, rather than just letting your art speak for itself in whatever way that looks like, But going back to what I was saying about scheduling those times to be creative, obviously this is very subjective. So you kind of just have to work with what works for you, what works and what doesn't. But one thing that I know about myself is that I rely on feeling a lot. Okay. And that can get me into a lot of gray areas at times, because a lot of things in your life require you to operate more from a system than they do from your intuitive feelings about them. Okay. Because I'm a college student. When I wake up in the morning for an 8 a.m. class, is my initial feeling, oh, I'm so excited to go to class and to learn more, and I can't wait to do this and that and the other thing? Fuck no. My initial feeling is, all I want to do is bury my head in the pillow even deeper and forget that I have anything important to do today, So, like, you can't fully rely on feeling if you want to get things done, okay? Like, it's just kind of not possible in a way. And I know that sounds very, like, negative, but I do think that there is a way for you to find balance in doing the things that you quote unquote have to do and doing the things that you want to do, right? And that's one of the things that you can use as a tool to help you prioritize creativity, is kind of categorizing certain tasks to make it a little bit more feasible. So, for example, you have tasks that are for educational purposes, okay? This can look like, doing a deep dive into a topic that really interests you. That can look like scheduling time to read or to listen to a YouTube video. Like educational things, carving out intentional time to learn things can look like a million different things. So, categorizing tasks is not necessarily making it so that you're putting certain tasks into a box, even though that's kind of exactly what you're doing in a way. It's not limiting yourself on what you can do. It's you kind of understanding what the overarching motive of that task is so that you can assess your energy levels. So we're bringing in how you're feeling and then understanding what category you have the energy for, right? Because we don't always have energy to be lectured. Okay, we don't always have the energy to do the research and go into the deepest parts of our subconscious minds and rewire things and unlearn things and relearn things. And like sometimes that's not the vibe, okay? Sometimes that's just not the vibe. So that's why I kind of like this notion of categorizing things, because now you have this category of, okay, maybe right now I have the energy to tap into the educational realm. Maybe I'm actually not feeling like I have the energy for that, and I'm feeling a lot more inspired to go the creative route. So now I have the freedom, if you will, to create freely. Okay. Maybe for you that looks like painting, even though the creative project that's on your mind right now that you're constantly thinking of is not painting. But every time that you're tapping into creativity, that is you working in tandem with your creative act that you are currently pursuing, because you are still strengthening that muscle. Everything that you're doing for the greater good of yourself is going to reflect positively for your art. That's just the baseline of it all that I think we have to almost constantly come back to in a conscious manner, because sometimes when we are dipping our toes into different avenues of creativity, number one, we're not looking at it as this is me doing something creative right now. We're sometimes looking at that as we're using this as a distraction from the creative act that we are supposed to be doing. But every time that you're telling yourself that you are supposed to be doing something, that is a limiting belief that you have. That is not the truth of the matter. That is you telling yourself that you are not right where you're meant to be. But if you're feeling creatively pulled to do something, especially if it's not in the realm of things that you are usually used to working in, just follow that impulse, okay? Because creativity is an impulse. Creativity is something that you have to consciously allow yourself to follow without judgment, without fear, and with confidence in that thing. That's so much easier said than done. But the more that you follow that almost blindly without making sense of it first and just allowing it to give you new experiences that you wouldn't have had if you didn't follow it, the more you're strengthening that muscle, the more you're familiarizing yourself with the act of creating and the act of trusting and surrendering, which goes hand in hand with creation, okay? Because if you're not surrendering to the process, if you're not trusting in yourself or in God, then you're not ever going to capture the essence of the feeling that you are tapping into when you're creating something. You're allowing the fear and the judgment and the perception of other people and all those things get in the way. And that's blocking you from allowing yourself to see your vision clearly. So it's always going to make you feel like you're not good enough and your art is not good enough. Okay. When we're talking about having to sort of make time for our creative aspirations, what comes up for a lot of us is this feeling like we have to sacrifice something else in order to prioritize our art. And that's not a fun feeling to feel. Okay. Every single time that we run ourselves into this sort of opportunity cost where we have to choose the more lucrative option rather than what we genuinely want to be doing, That doesn't make us feel good about ourselves. But that's the thing. You're looking at creativity as the less lucrative option. You're looking at creativity as another thing that you have to add onto your schedule, another thing that you have to do. And it is so valid for it to feel that way because the act of being creative entails so much more than just putting pen to paper, okay? There are so many steps that go on with the creative process, and we've talked about so many of them here on this podcast. But, even just the act of putting your art out into the world has a million steps in that process and a million sort of mental, spiritual, physical changes and things that surface in the process. And I think that when we allow the analytic part of our brains to take over in the creative process, that is where we are doomed to find writer's block in our path, okay? You cannot think analytically about the process of creating because the process of creating is inherently intuitive. It's not analytical. It's not logical. It's not something that has a step-by-step process. It's something that's even hard to express and to understand and talk about even because it's something that is so intrinsically motivated. When people are like, I just always knew that I was going to be a singer. Like, it was never something that I questioned or, sorry guys, I'm getting really uncomfy because there's a capybara digging in my back right now. What the hell was I even saying? Listen, I'm someone who is not an analytic thinker at all, like almost to a fault sometimes, even though like I don't necessarily view that as a fault, but I internalize it as a fault sometimes because obviously there are moments in your life that call you to think a little more realistically and analytically about situations in your life. But I also think for me personally, when I'm thinking so realistically, it invites in that part of me that overthinks the situation, okay? It invites in that part of me that starts bringing up the what if clauses in life. And I start thinking, okay, well, if I don't do it this way, then what if this happens? If I do it this way, what if this happens? And it's like, okay, in a way that's you thinking realistically because those are possible things that can come up, but you thinking about those things is not preparing you for them happening because the only thing that quote unquote prepares you to be able to approach the obstacles and challenges that you will inevitably face in your life are honestly God, if you want to go there, and trust, which is basically the same fucking thing when I'm talking about God. Like, if you don't have trust, then all you have is fear. Okay? Actually, oh my goodness, guys, I've been meaning to talk to you about this, and I actually wanted to do a whole episode on like my current stance with religion and spirituality and all those things, but that's one that I definitely need to just like let come to me when it comes. I don't really want to plan out that conversation too in depth, but I have been keeping up with Euphoria, and this is not a spoiler, by the way, but one of the episodes in the newest season, I think it was the first episode actually, the main character, Rue, was coming to this crossroads with her own personal spirituality. And one of the characters in the show says to her, you either have faith or you don't. Okay. And I did not mean to go into this conversation today, but I also just think like, there are no fucking bounds, okay? Especially in this podcast, like y'all know by now, like we are going to go in a million directions and they will somewhat tie sometimes and sometimes they maybe won't in your head, but they do to me. I don't know. But I just thought that that was so profound. It really stuck with me because it's so true. Like sometimes we drive ourselves crazy being like, I can't believe this if I believe that, and this contradicts that, and whatever. And it's like, bottom line, if you have faith, you have faith. And if you fucking don't, you don't. And I think that that relates, honestly, in a lot of ways to creativity because we do the same thing with our own art. Sometimes we believe in ourselves because we have that motivation and that spark of inspiration from other people where we start to realize, shit, I have it in me too. Oh my God, like I'm seeing beauty in their art because it's in me. And all of a sudden, we're getting this kind of rush of inspiration and almost like confidence in ourselves. But then, just as easy as it is to feel that way sometimes, we can go the 180 direction and feel the complete opposite at times. Even if we have strengthened that muscle and we've constantly been showing up in our creative spaces. And it's very easy for us to just be like, no, yeah, I don't really have what it takes. Actually, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I don't trust in my process right now because I'm trying to control it. And when I don't have control over it, it doesn't make me feel like I'm surrendering and I'm trusting. It just makes me feel like I don't have a hold over it. And the thing about creativity and spirituality, if we are going there today, is that it's not asking of you to have a hold of it. It's not asking you to completely understand it even. And I know I said that already in the beginning, so I won't go too in depth with it, but you don't need to have it all figured out. You don't have to understand every single micro level of why you are the way you are, why your creative acts are working in tandem with the other creative acts that you have already tried out and whatnot. Like, you don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to do it. And, isn't that the same with spirituality? Isn't that the same with believing in a higher power? Like, you don't know what that higher power actually is. None of us do. As much as we try to say we do, none of us do, okay? We all have different names for it and whatnot, but none of us actually know what the fuck happens when we leave this physical realm. You can find a million different perspectives on what to believe, but that's just not the point. Like, that's just not the point. And the more that you catch yourself in the midst of overthinking and you find yourself saying, I should be doing this, I shouldn't do that, I need to do this, or whatever those limiting beliefs manifest for you in forms of thought or feeling, the more that you bring your awareness to them, the more that you are making them conscious. Okay. And when you make those fears, those judgments, those glimpses of overthinking, actual conscious thoughts, that's when you start to separate your thinking self from your actual true self. Because your mind and your heart are usually telling you two different stories. And sometimes we think that we're operating from feeling because we're listening to what our head is saying. But operating from feeling in a way that actually will fill your cup and will actually bring energy into your life rather than drain you is you listening to your heart, not your mind. Because when I'm waking up in the morning for my 8 a.m. class and my initial feeling is, oh, I would rather do anything else than wake up for this class right now, that's not my heart telling me that. That's my mind. That's my first thought in the morning, And of course, it's going to be a thought that's reiterated to me because, number one, I'm someone who has never felt rested ever in my life. So every time I wake up in the morning, I have thoughts along the lines of that. That makes me sound like a very negative person, but I just love my sleep and I never get enough of it. So that's just a story for another day. But okay, that kind of made no sense when I explained it, but I feel like I was kind of getting somewhere with that. But sometimes when we have to prioritize other things in our lives that we don't necessarily want to be prioritizing or that are kind of just taking more energy from us and it's causing us to kind of put our creative passions on the back burner, what happens is that we start, whether or not we are still pouring into our creative passions, we start to almost resent the things that are inhibiting our ability to put all of our energy into our creative work. So then we're not only feeling burnt out and like we're not even able to put the energy that we know we can into our creative work, but we're also feeling guilty every single time we are pouring into anything else but our creations. So this kind of toes the line of, attaching your worth and your identity to your creative passions and all those things. We're really going into every single direction today. I did not expect to talk about spirituality and half the things we talked about today. But this just kind of proves that creativity bleeds into every single aspect of your life, and every aspect of your life bleeds into creativity. Like, it genuinely is a double-edged sword. And that's why this kind of black and white thinking when it comes to creativity is so paralyzing. It's because creativity cannot be thought about in a black and white perspective. It just simply is not something that you can even categorize. And I know that sounds contradictory because I literally started off giving you the tip to kind of categorize different forms of creativity, but that is just you making it tangible in your head rather than actually identifying with a specific mold that you have to fill in order to be creative. Like, you don't have to show up a certain way. All you need to show up is exactly as you are. Like, if it helps you putting it into these words, if it scares you to call yourself an artist because that brings up a lot of imposter syndrome or whatever, then rephrase it. You're not an artist, you're someone who creates art, okay? Like, if you have to think of it that way, then think of it that way. At the end of the day, we are all creating things every single day, whether or not you're getting paid for your creative work, whether or not you're even sharing it with the world. We are all creating things. When you leave this earth, you created things that were not created before you got here. No matter what the fuck it is, on what level it has met people or affected people or changed their lives or not. Like, it does not matter. You have already created things in your life. You've created yourself. You've co-created so many things with the universe that you don't even consciously realize. And your creative work is just a way of you actualizing that. You tapping into your creative passions, which is the part of you that is your soul begging to express itself into the world. You doing that is you co-creating with the universe, with God, with whatever word or phrase you use to categorize a higher power. And that's such a beautiful thing that we are not meant to deprive ourselves of in this world. And when you're depriving yourself of that, you're also depriving the world from experiencing it and from gathering information from it and taking something out of nothing and using your creative ideas to inspire creative ideas of their own. And that's why there's this perpetuating conversation that happens when you create art, that I always say in this podcast, like, you are contributing to the conversation every single time you're putting your art out there. And I am at a point in my life right now where I'm realizing that you sharing your art is part of the creative process. It's not just a choice that you can make. You creating art and sharing it in the world is where the innovative part of art comes into play. Because if Picasso never shared his fucking paintings with the world, not only would we never get to experience that art, but Picasso's form of abstract art started a movement of abstract art that bled into the creation of a million new art forms because of that. And art forms that have nothing to do with painting, like abstract dance, abstract music, like all that shit, like it all ties in to one another in a way that we can't necessarily explain in the most thorough way, but it is so pivotal to art and creation as a whole. So you not sharing your art is you not allowing innovation to bleed through you and to excite others, like inspiration is what breeds creativity. You getting inspiration from someone else and making something of your own through that. Like, that is innovative. And then it allows other people to do the same. I just feel like I could talk about creativity for a million years. And that's one of the reasons why I changed my podcast name, to be honest. Like, it's something that you could really go in a million directions with, and it ties to everything, and it's so important. And I think that the world we live in right now is so demanding of us that it drains every single ounce of energy we have left, to the point where we feel like we don't have time or energy to actually devote ourselves to our creative passions. And that's a really important point to make here, is devotion. Because when we are wanting to be creative and when we're being excited about these new creative ideas that are coming to us, we immediately feel like we have to completely devote ourselves to that passion. And I'm not saying that you don't. Like, you absolutely do in a lot of ways. And it's more about devotion than it is discipline at the end of the day. And that's why, when we're towing the line between our head versus our heart, aka alluding to the last episode that I posted, or just the idea of operating from how we're feeling versus how we're thinking about how we're feeling, I would honestly argue that we all have time to devote ourselves to our art. Maybe not the most time in the world, maybe not the amount of time that we think it needs or that denotes it as purposeful, but we do have time. Okay, like, you know what? I'm gonna be that bitch right now. I want you to go on your phone right now and look at your screen time per day or per week and tell me that you don't have time to pour into your creative passions. And I know you can argue with that and be like, yeah, but like the times that I'm on my phone is when I'm so brain dead that the only thing that I can do is scroll. Well, how do you know that if you've never done anything else but that? How do you know that? Like, you do have time, and you make time for the things that you care about. So even if it's 5 minutes a day, it's just you thinking of ideas. Like, you have to drop the belief that being creative looks a certain way. Being creative feels a certain way, even. Like, you just have to let yourself get lost in it. You really do. You really do. And, that kind of becomes a sticky situation when you're letting yourself get lost in it almost to the point where you're using it as an escape, because art shouldn't necessarily be an escape, but it's a way for you to make sense of reality. And sometimes art is the most unrealistic way you can make sense of reality. And you just have to let it be what it is. But if you're going to be realistic with anything in the creative process, be realistic about how much time you are pouring into other things that are not filling your cup, that you're just using as a distraction, okay? Genuinely, like, make a list of all the things that are distracting you on a daily basis. Like, I know for all of us, technology is on that list. It totally is. And I'm not sitting here demonizing it, because obviously technology in a lot of ways can be an art form. And for me personally, it is right now. I'm literally talking to my phone as I'm sitting here on this mic, but you are not harnessing your creativity by consuming more than you are creating. And I know a lot of people say that we should be only creating and not consuming. And I honestly don't fully believe that. I think that consuming other people's ideas, creations, art, whatever it is so important, because that's how you gather inspiration. That's how you also gather information about yourself and what interests you and what sparks those little creative nudges in you, all that stuff. Like, it's all information, but it does get to a point where information can become overwhelming at times, because you're tapping into that creative form of education, like I said in the beginning, more than you are any other realm. So you're feeling burnt out from that process as a whole, because you're putting all of your eggs in one basket, when you're forgetting to realize that there are so many facets to yourself, to your being. And with that, there are so many facets to creativity and how your own persona, the way that you view yourself and the way that you outwardly express yourself to the world, there are a million different ways for you to go about that. And consuming other people's art is totally one of those facets of yourself, But we just have to be conscious about it. We just have to make sure that we're inviting some sort of balance into the conversation. And that's why for some people it works to kind of approach creativity from a more ritualistic stance, where, on every single Monday, you are carving out the time period from 1 to 3 p.m. to work on your art. And some people, that is so the opposite of how they operate. So it is so situational with how demanding the things in your life are, how demanding you let the things in your life be, and all the different roles you have in your life. There are so many things I can talk about, so I won't even go down the entire list, but it is very situational and it's very subjective. And learning to give yourself grace while also trying to show up the best that you possibly can in every single area of your life is really fucking hard. It's really fucking hard because it takes all of your energy from you. So it comes down to you rewiring your brain to understand that when you are being creative, that is not a form of draining your energy. When you are being creative, you need to rewire your thinking so that you believe that when you are being creative, that is you filling your cup up. When you're being creative, that is you inviting new energy into your soul, your spirit, your psyche, all the things. Like, you are finding new energy forms to operate from and to open new doors for other things in your life when you're just shifting your perspective a little bit on how it affects you. And I think I've said enough in this episode, to be honest. So I'm just giving you guys a few more tips on tangible things that you can implement into your daily routine that are realistic, that you can do right now as you're listening. One of the things that you can do is make a list of all the places that make you feel most creative. So maybe for you, that's a coffee shop. Maybe for you, that's a library. That's a museum. Just being outside in nature. Wherever you feel like your walls come down. The thing that I love about this exercise is that it helps you realize what it means to be creative to you, because it kind of points you in the direction of understanding what it is about those spaces that make you feel creative, which helps you understand what creativity almost feels like in your body. You know, like if you're someone who feels most creative when you're in a coffee shop, maybe for you personally, what kind of ignites that creative spark in you is seeing other people interact, being around human connection, being around noise, being around just the hustle and bustle of everyday life and the kind of more mundane things that we don't naturally almost tap into. You know, making a cup of coffee or just having a surface level conversation with a stranger, like all those things. If that makes you feel most creative, where you're able to tap into the beauty of life in the simplicity of it, maybe that's to you, you get that from a coffee shop. Maybe nature is it for you, because when you're in nature, that makes you feel closest to God. And when you feel closest to God, that's when you feel the most creative. Like, it's going to be subjective for you in how it actually manifests through you, because we are all alchemists. We alchemize the pain and the experiences and the good and the bad that we've been through in our lives. And that's where our art manifests through and from, is from all of those past experiences that we've had. So we're all alchemists, and that's why it's going to look and feel a little bit differently for everyone. But, you know, I don't want to end this conversation with you feeling discouraged by scheduling times to be creative, because that can be a great tactic for you. And if that works really well for you, have at it, go for it. But if it doesn't, I think it's worth just understanding what about it doesn't work. Is it the fact that you are just expecting yourself to show up a certain way in every moment that you are carving out time to be creative? Is it that you're not really allowing yourself to let creativity be a malleable thing that is not so clear cut and is a little more ambiguous? You know, creativity is inevitably going to look a little different every single time you tap into it. And that's why when you schedule times to pour into your creative self, you kind of have to reframe it to just scheduling times for you to be with yourself, for you to explore different parts of yourself. Okay, like maybe looking at it and reframing it in that way kind of relinquishes some pressure from it, hopefully for you, because then it allows you to just let the creativity flow through you naturally. Okay, like you just scheduling time to be with yourself is going to allow you to dip into different creative avenues that you maybe wouldn't have let yourself touch before, because like I said before, you might be viewing those things as distractions. If you are a podcaster and the creative act that you're letting yourself dive into today is coloring, in your head, you're like, okay, well, that's not me being creative. This is not a productive way of me using my creative time because I'm not actively pouring into what I know that I need to be pouring into. But that's not the point of scheduling these creative times for you. It's literally to do exactly that. It's for you to allow yourself to have creative freedom over whatever feels good to you in the moment and to exercise your right to do what feels good to you. Because we just get so caught up with productivity, especially if you live in America or in a capitalist society where it's all work, work, work until you die. Wow, that was really depressing. Not only do we subconsciously attach our worth to how much work we're putting into things, but also we start to view the only things as quote unquote productive as the things that are draining us. And that's just so not the point, okay? It's so not the point. And it is not your fault that your brain might be wired that way right now to think like that, because that's how our society like genuinely wires our brain to think. But productivity is not about you getting to the point where you're inevitably reaching burnout every single time because you've exhausted all of your energy, or you having to show up a certain way in a certain space every single time. That is not what productivity means or looks like. Productivity is you pouring into yourself, you consciously making efforts to pour into yourself and consciously knowing that every single thing that you are doing for the greater good of you or society is you pouring into yourself and allowing those things to kind of manifest naturally, allowing those things to work in tandem with one another in a way that is not robbing you of your freedom, robbing you of your natural creative abilities that are inherent within you, because all of us are creative and all of us are creatives. Okay, so just allow yourself to be that. And unfortunately, the thing that comes with creativity is you feeling a lot of the times like you aren't doing the quote unquote most productive thing. Like that's just how it feels since the world wires us to think about productivity at the forefront of our brain. The analytic part of us, the left side of your brain, is always on go. That part is always firing, always trying to get more out of you. And creativity is an act of rebellion against the ideas and ideologies that you have to constantly be doing in a certain way, at a certain speed, at a certain time. Creativity is completely free. It operates with no bounds, which feels so completely wrong. But you have to just keep doing it to familiarize with the act of creating. And then it just becomes second nature, baby, okay? And then the world is your fucking oyster from there. So you're always going to run into some obstacles with creating, okay? We all run into writer's block. We all can be our worst enemy sometimes, and it can be easier at times to listen to those limiting beliefs and let them creep in a little further than they should. And you're human. You're human, so that's so normal, and it's like genuinely every single person on the planet, even the biggest stars in the world, have gone through those things a million times. And if you need to just hear them talk about it in order for you to familiarize yourself with the humanistic parts of it that bleeds into your creativity, then go look up YouTube videos about your favorite artists talking about creating art, because I'm sure they talk about all those obstacles there. So that's all I have for you. I'm just sending all the love and the patience in the world to you right now. If you're at a crossroads with your own creative process or just creating yourself, whatever it might be, seriously, you're not alone. You are not alone. And I would love to talk about it more with you, especially if you want to get more personal with your journey or you just need someone to kind of bounce off ideas or things like that. I'm always a listening ear for you guys, so feel free to DM me at Creative Weirdo on Instagram or my main Instagram at Lizzie Arduino. I'll have everything kind of linked in the show notes below, but Yeah, I just really appreciate you guys following along my own creative journey with me, and it's something that I will literally never take for granted. I just feel so lucky and it feels so special being able to create a community based on my own art form. Like, that's so cool to me. So, thank you for allowing me to do so. And I would really appreciate you leaving a comment, a review, rating, whatever it might be, on whatever platform you're listening or watching this. I really value your feedback, and I just love to hear from you guys and see what you're liking and you're not liking and you want to hear more from and whatever. And always feel free to reach out with me with, things you want me to talk about in episodes. I would love to get some inspiration from you guys. Like, I want this space to be us really working tangibly together in a way that fuels both of us at the same time. So you're part of the conversation, whether or not it feels that way, because you're just kind of consuming what I'm saying. I feel like I'm having a conversation with you guys every single time I'm sitting on here and talking to you. So I hope you feel that way too. And yeah, I'm just sending you so much love. And I'll see you in the next episode.